Blessings and peace, and thank you for joining us once again for our Great Controversy devotional series, where we are using that wonderful devotional book, Christ Triumphant, that deals with the issues surrounding this great controversy between Christ and Satan. The devotional thought for today, January the 7th, is entitled, Enoch's Example Challenges Us Today. And the scripture reading is taken from 2 Peter chapter 1 and verse 4, which says, whereby are given unto us exceeding great and precious promises, that by these ye might become partakers of the divine nature, having escaped the corruptions that are in the world through lust. It was no easier for Enoch to live a righteous life in his day than it is for us at the present time. The world in Enoch's time was no more favorable to a growth in grace and holiness than it is now. So this again is an expansion of the principle that was established in yesterday's devotional thought, that we should not think that it was easier for Enoch to live a righteous life. Those people who in his day than in ours, those people whom he lived amongst, which were people of massive intellect, were also wickedly great and greatly wicked. And therefore we should not assume that it was easier for him to live righteous before God than it is for us to live righteous before God. His age was a corrupt and a degenerate age, which was the reason why God had to destroy the world that he lived in by a flood. So the world in Enoch's time was no more favorable to a growth in grace and holiness than it is now. But Enoch devoted time to prayer and communion with God, and this enabled him to escape the corruption that is in the world through lust. So how did Enoch escape the corruption that is in the world through lust? How did Enoch have such a real and a profound relationship with God that caused him to be translated to heaven without seeing death? He made time for prayer. He devoted time to prayer and communion with God. So he devoted, he set apart, he set aside, he earmarked that time. He planned, he scheduled God in his life. So him having a relationship with God was his plan. That was his desired outcome. That was his goal. That was his major objective. This is what he planned for. This is what he executed for, having a real relationship with Christ. He made time to have communion with God. So it was not leftover time that he gave to God. It was not a happenstance thing where he was concerned with his relationship to God. He made time. He devoted time then. He set apart time. He was deliberate in obtaining the victory in his life as a child of God. This was a deliberate act. Being a Christian must be a deliberate act. It doesn't come naturally. It cannot. We have to fight for it, strive for it, work for it, live for it, plan for it, eat for it, think for it, sing for it, play for it. This is what we have to do. It must be a deliberate action to live a godly life. It was his devotion to God that fitted him for translation. So he was devoted to God. He was dedicated to God. He was fully consecrated to God. And this was a choice that he kept making over and over again every day. This is the goal that he reminded himself about. This is what kept him focused. His devotion to God, his communion to God. This is how he was translated. This is how he escaped the corruptions that were and are in the world through lust. He kept that open line of communication, and he planned for success, and he executed for success, and he kept focused on his goal, regardless of circumstances. We are living amid the perils of the last days, and we must receive our strength from the same source as did Enoch. We must walk with God. A separation from the world is required of us. We cannot remain free from this pollution unless we follow the example of faithful Enoch and walk with God. You cannot walk with God and walk with the world at the same time. We can walk in the world, but we don't need to be identified as being part of the system of thinking, of speaking, of actions of this world. A separation from the world is required of us. We cannot remain free from this pollution unless we follow the example of faithful Enoch and walk with God. But how many are slaves to the lust of the flesh and the lust of the eye and the pride of life? This is the reason they are not partakers of the divine nature and do not escape the corruption that is in the world through lust. What's the reason? Because many are slaves to the flesh, to the lust of the eye, and to the pride of life. They are serving and honoring self. Their constant study is, what shall I eat? What shall I drink? And wherewithal shall I be clothed? If your constant study is, how can I please God? How can I glorify God? If this is the thought in your mind, if this is the thought at the back of your mind every day, your life changes, your attitude changes, the direction that your life is going, that your path is leading you down, it changes. Because then your purpose is to glorify God. This is how Enoch was translated. Many talk of sacrifice when they do not know what sacrifice is. They have not tasted its first draught. They talk of the cross of Christ. They profess the faith, but they have no experience in self-denial, lifting the cross and bearing it after the Lord. If we follow Jesus, we will have to sacrifice. No one enters into heaven without some form of sacrifice. Too many of us as God's people do not want to sacrifice. Oh, that's not for me to do. Let somebody else do that. Beloved, we don't get into heaven without sacrifice. Salvation was purchased for us through sacrifice. Love was revealed to us through sacrifice. And beloved, in order to obey God, to live for Jesus, there will be a sacrifice. We cannot have faith without sacrifice, and we cannot love God without sacrifice. They talk of the cross of Christ, they profess the faith, but they have no experience in self-denial, lifting the cross and bearing it after their Lord. If they were partakers of the divine nature, the same spirit that dwelt in their Lord would dwell in them. The same tenderness and love, the same pity and compassion would be manifested in their lives. They would not then wait to have the needy and unfortunate come to them and be entreated to feel their woes. It would be as natural for them to aid the needy and minister to their wants as it was for Christ to go about doing good. So if we are filled with that spirit of tenderness for souls, that spirit of sacrifice, that if we are partakers of the divine nature, ministering to others who are in need becomes a natural part of our experience. Because we are now being partakers of the divine nature. The divine nature is that nature of sacrifice. Every man, woman, and youth who professes the religion of Christ should realize the responsibility resting upon them. All should feel that this is an individual work, an individual warfare, an individual preaching of Christ in the daily practice. Beloved, it's individual. If each would realize this and take hold of the work, we should be mighty as an army with banners. The heavenly dove would hover over us. The heavenly dove does not hover over us simply because we ask or because we're in church, but because we intend to be like Jesus. The heavenly dove also hovers over us when we are doing the work that Jesus would do. The Spirit of God will always be where Jesus is supposed to be, where Jesus should be. And in that moment, you receive fresh power to fulfill your duties to fallen humanity. The Sun of Righteousness would shine upon us, and the light of the glory of God would be no more shut from us than it was from the devoted Enoch. So recognize today, beloved, your religion your religious duty in following Christ, your individual responsibility to serve others, to minister to the needs of others, to help others. Stop. Don't just listen. Don't just look. Don't just sit and wait for the opportunity. You go and look for it. When you look for it, you find it. When you ask God to show you as you interact with people, you realize your responsibility. You realize that what is your duty to do in the moment that it needs to be done as well. And this is how the heavenly dove hovers over you. Be devoted to God. Let it be your decision. Let it be your focus. Let it be your intention. Let it be your daily purpose. Let it be your daily striving to be like Jesus. And this is how you would be an overcomer, even as Enoch was an overcomer. Blessings and peace.